Hi, my name is Griffin, and this is my Lab 6 for ENME351. So starting with my setup, I have this wire, which is going to be powering the potentiometer, which is connected to a digital pen. I chose pen 11. And then I have this, which is going to be an analog read of the potentiometer. And then I have the potentiometer connected to ground. And then looking at the servo right here, I have ground and power to it. And then I also have it connecting to a digital pen, which I chose pen number 9. So looking at my Arduino code, I declared all of the pens, and I just chose variables to represent each integer. And in my setup, I have the pen mode of everything that I'm using with the digital write. And so I have the pen for the potentiometer, for powering the potentiometer, and then my servo is going to be pin 9, and that's to power the servo. And so they're both going to be outputs, and then I have serial.begin of the baud rate just to print stuff to the serial monitor. In my loop, I first write my potentiometer to high, and then I start doing math down here. And so I declare an integer, and that's going to be the code coming out of the potentiometer. So I'm going to analog read it, and that's going to come out as a code. And then to convert this into T control, I looked at my data sheet for my specific servo, and I found out that the period, so T control, goes from 500 or 0.5 milliseconds to 2500 microseconds or 2.5 milliseconds. So I declared this as a float, and I figured out what T control was. And then my T period is always the same. It is 20 milliseconds or 20,000 microseconds. And just as a check, I figured out what the duty cycle was right here. So you do T control over the total period times 100, and I figured out that the duty cycle went from 2.5 to 12.5. And then I figured out what the angle was by also using map, which map basically just draws a line and figures out the slope of the equation. So I figured out the angle based on T control. So I went from, again, 500 to 2500. And so when it's at 500, that's going to be negative 90 degrees, and 2500 corresponds to 90 degrees. And then I print to the serial monitor my angle. And so I do all this math under digital write, and I power up the potentiometer as high. And so after that, I power up the servo as high, and I leave it on for the specific T control. And then after that, I hold it off, and I turn the potentiometer and the servo off, and I delay it in microseconds of T period, which is the total period minus T control. And I do this because of pulse width modulation. So I first turn them on high, and I keep them on for T control, and then I turn them off low for T period minus T control. And so then I figure out that T control goes from 500 to 2500, and the angle goes from negative 90 to 90. So running my code. Okay, so running my code, and I'll show the serial monitor. So first, just looking at this, as you turn the potentiometer, it goes around. So that would be at negative 90, and then it does a full 180 degree turn to 90. And I'm turning it right now, so now it's at around 0, and then it goes all the way to negative 90.